Perfect. Great. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining in. I'm Rajdeep Pundir. I am the co-founder and CEO at ReWiser. And on today's session, we're going to talk about SATs and ACTs exams. So we'll start with the study abroad vertical. What all do you really need in terms of the admission process? And then we will deep dive into this particular exam for today's webinar. Please feel free to put up all your questions when we are delivering the webinar in the chat section, and we will try and take up all your questions towards the end of the webinar. You can at the end also unmute yourself and ask your questions, right? So you're allowed to do that towards the later half. In between, if you have any questions, please feel free to put it up in the chat section and we will try and answer it through the chat or maybe take up those questions towards the end. As we said, in today's webinar, we're going to largely talk about the standardized test. What is the importance of these SATs and ACTs exam? When should you be writing? Who should be writing it? Should you be writing in grade 9, grade 10, grade 11? How should you be planning the next 2 years, 3 years, 4 years of your college prep journey? What are the countries that accept SATs and ACT scores? Should you be writing SAT or should you be writing ACT? How should you decide between the two exams? How ReWiser basically can help you with regards to your SAT, ACT prep. So that's going to be our agenda for today's webinar. With that, let me give a quick brief introduction about the company. So ReWiser is a high school support company which assists students worldwide to achieve their high school academic goals. We've been working with students starting as early as grade 8 to grade 12. We largely have two main verticals within the company. The first one is test prep, where we do SATs, ACTs, and AP exam prep, plus the IELTS prep. So these are the 4 different exams that we cater under the test prep section. And then we have the other vertical, which is in the academic tutoring domain, where we do IGCSE, IB, A-level subject tutoring. So we also take care of about 9 subjects in case of these international curriculums. Over the last 7 years, we have helped about 4,500 families in the last 7 years. Currently, we have helped students in 8+ countries and almost about 20+ cities across India. So that's what we have, our success story has been so far. With that, let me deep dive into the major topics that we are going to discuss in today's webinar. So the first important thing, right? So I think when you're looking at study abroad, how is it different from admissions in India, right? So I think we largely say that there are 4 major pillars in the college application process. And the first major pillar is academics, right? So your academic scores from grade 9, from grade 10, from grade 11, your actual scores will go to the college, plus your grade 12 predicted scores. Now, what is that? Since when you're applying to US, unlike India, you apply to US or UK or Canada while you are in grade 12 itself. So you would not have received your grade 12 final score exams. And hence, your school will have to predict a score for you, right? Saying that this child will get a 90%, 85%, 95%, and that score will go to the college, right? So your grade 9, 10th, 11th actual scores will go to the college and your 12th predicted scores will go to the college. Academics is the most important factor, even if you're applying outside of India, right? So please don't consider that, in India, academics is a lot more important than outside of India. That's not true. Academic has to be the most important factor, even when you're applying outside of India. That's the first major pillar. The second important pillar is the standardized test scores. Now, under standardized tests, all these exams that we spoke about and that we're going to deep dive into will come into picture, which is SATs, SAT, ACT, AP exams, IELTS, TOEFL, all these exams comes under your standardized testing, right? And then you have the third pillar, which is the profile building. Now, what is profile building? So for example, let's say you want to pursue computer science as a major in college, right? Now, how do you showcase to the college that you are a candidate who has interest in computer science, right? To showcase your interest towards computer science, you have to do certain activities to build your profile, right? So that is profile building. For example, you might end up doing internship. You might end up writing a research paper. You might end up doing a project with maybe some professor or somebody. You might probably end up creating an app on your own. You might create an app and maybe also start a business of your own. So all of this activity, you could do a social service activity, anything linked to it is all profile building aspect, right? But it doesn't have to be very generic per se, right? I mean, it should ideally be linked to the major that you really want to do and your passion that you have, right? For example, a lot of parents and students come and ask me that, hey Raji, do we really need to do social service activity, right? And do we have to have one sport? No. So it doesn't have to be, you have to check box everything, right? I think I strongly believe, based on my experience, that students who have depth in a particular area has a better chance to get into top colleges rather than students who just have, broader view about different topics, right? So it's not just about checking 10 different things. It's about maybe just doing three things, but doing it, effectively, right? Maybe do it to a level which maybe other peers have not done, right? So that is profile building for us. And then the fourth component is college application, which is very straightforward. That only comes in grade 12, which includes your shortlisting of universities. Where would you want to apply? You will probably select certain set of safe universities, dream universities, ambitious universities, reach universities, right? And then once you have shortlisted the university, you'll start applying through the different application processes. So US has a different application process, right? So there's a common app through which you apply to different universities in US. For UK, there's a different application process. There's a UCAS through which you apply towards UK. For Singapore, there's different. For Canada, there's different. So for different countries, there are different application process. So first, you will do the shortlisting of universities. Once you have done that, you will start submitting your application. Under that application, you'll have to write multiple essays, right? So that's part of your college application journey. LOS is nothing but letter of recommendation, which you will need because you'll have to submit that to the college. Now that can come either from your school counselor, school principal, school teachers, or it can also come from outside of your school, wherever you have done some work, right? It could be internship or anything else from any of your mentor, right? So that is letter of recommendation. So these are the four major pillars that you really need to look at: academics, standardized test prep, profile building, college application, right? Now, what we will do is we will deep dive into the standardized testing for today. And specifically, we will talk about SATs, ACTs. We'll briefly touch upon APs as well, keeping the time constraint in mind. And then towards the end, what we will also try and do is we'll reconnect back to all these four pillars and show you in terms of timelines, what is the right time to start working on each of them, right? So with that, let me start with the first test, which is the SAT. It's an exam which is started by an organization called College Board, which is a US-based entity. It's a not-for-profit organization. So they're conducting SATs across the globe, across the world. And today, SAT is a digital SAT. So it's also known as DSAT instead of SAT because of the digital SAT format. Starting this March was the first digital SAT, May was the second digital SAT, and June is going to be the third digital SAT. So there are already two digital SAT which have already happened. So it's nothing new now. So we will only talk about the digital SAT in today's webinar, because now we don't really have to talk about the pen and papers. However, please note, if there is anybody in today's webinar who's attending who's from US, or if you have friends and family in US, they are still writing the pen and paper version. So they would continue to write the pen and paper version for the next one more year up until March 2024. And post March 2024, starting March 2024, even the SAT in US will become digital. As of now, across the globe, excluding US, it is a digital SAT. Now, with regards to the testing, the test happens 7 times a year. So as I said, March, May, June, August, October, November, December. So these are the 7 days when this test happens. As the name suggests, it is a digital exam. You can carry your own laptop, but you'll have to still go to the center and write the exam. The exam is going to be a 2 hours, 14-minute test. There are broadly 2 sections. One is English and another one is maths. We will look at the internal complications within that as well. It's required by most of the US colleges. At the same point of time, it also helps in many other geographies. Now, let me look at this statement and help you understand a couple of things. Why I said required by most US colleges and not all. So I'm pretty sure some of you might have heard of these terms called test optional, test blind, test mandatory, right? Now, what are these terms, right? So when you go to any college website, let's say you go to a Purdue University website and you go to their undergrad admission page, you will probably see some of these terms, right? So let me help you understand what these terms are, because when you're going through the websites, it's important for you to understand what it is, right? So when you say test blind, any university which say they are test blind, that means you will not have an option to submit your SAT scores. SAT scores are not required at all in these universities. They are test blind. They will turn blind towards your scores. All universities in California are test blind, and they've been test blind for almost 5 to 6 years now, right? So there's nothing new phenomena as such. So that's one, which is test blind. The second term that you will encounter is test optional. Now, what is test optional? If in case you have if you have done the digital SAT or the SAT exam, you should submit your score. If you have not, you can skip it. That is what the optional policy says. However, this policy came into existence during the pandemic because there were a lot of countries across Africa and other places which were not able to conduct the SAT exams offline. And hence they said, let's make it optional to make it level playing field for everybody. However, in India, because most of the SAT exams happened, so out of 10, almost about 7 students were doing the SAT, and the 3 who were not submitting the SAT were not able to justify why they were not doing it. And hence, they were always at a disadvantage of not doing the SAT. So our strong suggestion is, even if you encounter that any college says they are test optional, you should submit your SAT score until and unless you end up scoring really, really badly in the exam. If that's the case and the college is saying test optional, then you can forget about submitting the scores. However, otherwise, we would strongly urge that you should submit your SAT scores. We talked to multiple counselors and school admission officers, and after talking to them, we have realized it's always advantageous for you to submit your SAT scores if you have done the test and if you've done fairly well in the exam. So that's for test optional. Then there is third set of colleges which are test mandatory, right? So if you've done the exam, and these colleges are mandatory, so you have to have the SAT scores. For example, MIT, for example, Purdue, some of these universities are test mandatory to do, right? So you have to have your SAT scores. And hence, if you really look at it, these are the 3 broader categories. However, when you're writing an SAT exam, you'll realize you'll probably write it in grade 10th or grade 11th exam, right? And when you're doing it in grade 10th or grade 11th, by that time, there is no way that you would know which are the colleges that you're applying for. And hence, it's always better to keep the scores ready so that if in case you end up applying, you will have the scores at that point of time, right? So I think that is what I meant by required by most US colleges. Then I said it helps in many other geography. So if you really look at Canada, you look at Singapore, you look at Hong Kong, you look at India. These are few countries which also give you an option to submit your SAT scores if you've done it. And if you've done fairly well, there's a high probability that you might get admitted, plus you might gain certain scholarships from the colleges as well. So SAT is not just for US, there are other geographies as well where you could submit it, excluding UK is what I would say, because UK does not require you to do any test, any standardized test, right? That's why I said it helps in many other geographies. We also have a slide where we will talk about what are the colleges in India which takes SAT scores. So I think that will also be useful. Now, how is digital SAT different? The new digital SAT will be adaptive in nature. What do I mean by that? So there are, let's say, 2 sections. Your performance on section 1 will determine your paper in section 2. If you've done fairly well in section 1, your section 2 is going to be difficult. If you've not done well in section 1, then your section 2 is going to be easy, right? So that is adaptiveness. You'll only have 2 sections instead of 4. So earlier there used to be 4 sections. Now there is only 2 sections, which is English and math. You can use your own devices. As I said, you can carry your own devices to the exam center and do the exam, which is a welcome change. You're allowed to have so there'll always be a clock on the screen which will assist with time management. I know it might look very, very small pointer at this point of time, but we have had issues in the past where students forget to carry watch and they really struggle with the time management, right? So I think this is again a welcome move. Since now it's a digital exam, you can always flag the questions and then come back to those flagged questions very easily, unlike a pen and paper version where you have to shuffle through multiple pages, right? So that's again a welcome move. You will have maths formula accessible at all point of time in one place. Just by a click of a button, you'll get the formula sheet, which is again a welcome change. Instead of going back to the first page all the time to look at the maths formula, now you can have it at the click of a button. So I think that's again a welcome change. So those are the changes that has happened in terms of logistically. But if you look at content-wise, not much has changed. Let's say if I look at maths. However, there are changes which has happened in English component specifically. So earlier there used to be a reading section and a writing section. Reading section is all about reading the passages and answering the questions. There's a huge revamp there that has happened. Earlier there used to be long reading passages that you have to read and you have to answer about 10 to 12 questions per passage. However, now you only have to read a particular para and then answer the question. So I think that's the major difference which has happened between the digital ST versus the earlier pen and paper version. So that's a welcome change again, because now students don't have to retain the entire passage and then answer the question. They can read para by para and answer the question, right? So I think that's again a welcome change. So the long reading passages are gone now. Questions are a lot more concise and a lot more straightforward. Even in maths, the length of the question has been reduced almost about by 20-30%. So there are still word problems, but the length has been reduced. You're allowed to have more time per question, and you will have lesser number of questions. So that's again an important change which has happened, and we'll look at it as we move along. You're allowed to use calculator throughout the math question section, which is again a very welcome move, especially by the international curriculum students. Earlier, when we were doing a regular SAT exam, you had one section which was a maths with calculator, and you had another section which was maths without the calculator. And that was a bit of a problem for some of the students because they were used to using the calculator. However, now you're allowed to use your math calculator all throughout your math section. So that's again a welcome move. Scores are available in days and not weeks, which is again a positive thing. Now, since I talked about adaptiveness, right? So a lot of you folks might have this question saying, how does the scoring work? Because if I get a difficult paper, then, you know, in that case, should I not be doing well in the first section? Should I get easy paper and then I end up doing well? So let me help you understand this, right? So let's look at this, right? So there are two stages in the current exam. In stage one, you have, let's say, English and a math section. In stage two, again, you have English and math section. Now, depending on your performance in stage one, your stage two difficulty level will get decided. Let's take an example. So for example, I have done the exam, and in stage one, I got 9 out of 20, let's assume. If I got a 9 out of 20, that means my stage two paper is going to be slightly easier. But the most important thing to note here is my upper and lower limit of my score is also decided. Out of 800, at best, I can get 560. At minimum, I can get 440. So even if I end up doing everything right in stage two, the maximum that I can score is only 560. I can, even after doing everything right in stage two, I can still not get to 800. That's why it's important for you to do well in stage one, so that your lower limit, which is getting decided in the next stage, is decently higher enough, right? As opposed to, so let's assume, take another example, right? So let's say there is another student who wrote the exam, got, let's say, 17 out of 20. And in that case, their lower limit is 680 and their higher limit is 800. Now, because they've done really well in stage one, their stage two paper is difficult. But even if they end up not doing really well in stage two, their score will at minimum be 680, right? Which is always better than 560, right? So that's how the adaptiveness will really work. And hence it becomes super important to make sure you do really well in your stage one exams, right? That's how the adaptiveness work, and that's how the scoring will happen. Let's try and do some number crunching here. So as I said, there will be two major broader sections. One is English, which has reading and writing component. Another one is maths. And each of these sections will be there in both the stages. So stage one will have English and maths. Stage two will have English and maths, right? So that's how, so for English and maths, for English, you'll have two sections. For math as well, you'll have two sections separately. So overall for English, you will have a total of 64 minutes and you have about 54 questions. In terms of scoring, the minimum that you can score is 200. The maximum that you can score is 800. Similarly, in maths, you'll have a total of 44 questions and you have 70 minutes to solve these questions. The minimum score that you can get is 200. The maximum score that you can get is 800. Overall, you have a 98 question and you have roughly about 134 minutes to solve this question. Minimum score that you can get is 400 and maximum that you can get is 1600. So that's how the overall numbering works. We will deep dive into this. Let's try and look at that individual section. So as I said, let's look at the reading and the writing section first. As I said, it's going to be two-stage adaptive test design. In stage one, you will have English section. In stage two, again, you'll have English section. In each stage, you will have total of 27 questions in English, out of which 25 questions are going to be operational questions. What do I mean by that? So there are 25 questions out of 27 questions, which will be considered towards your score. And there would still be 2 questions which are experimental questions, and they will not be considered towards your final score, right? But the point here is that as a student, when I'm attempting this exam, I wouldn't know which are these 2 questions. So I will still have to do all the 27 questions with the equal intensity and equal focus, right? So I think that becomes super important. The time that I have per module is 32 minutes. So you have 27 questions and you have 32 minutes to solve these questions. That's roughly about 1.19 minutes per question. And please do keep note of this time because we will come back to this time when we look at the ACT. So in SAT English section, the student will have 1.19 minutes per question. Let's see what are they testing you on. As I said, they will have shorter reading passages or paras now. They're largely focused on 4 content domain, which we will see on the next slide. Questions which are testing the similar skills will all be clubbed together. The test is divided into 2 different modules, as I said. This section will entail the passages, and those passages are taken up from literature, history, social studies, humanities, sciences, so different zones. I think that's very, very critical. So one of the major things where most of us as Indians have really struggled, or Asians have really struggled, is the English section. And the reason for that is largely the reading, right? Because we don't read so much. So one of the suggestions that I always have is start reading as early as possible. And if there are families and parents who are attending this webinar today, where the kid is in grade 8, grade 9, I would say start reading articles. Maybe read just 2 articles a day, but please start reading. Even if you're reading, don't just focus on reading fictional books, because that may not really help you in exams like SAT, because they're going to test you in different zones, right? I would recommend maybe start reading Wall Street Journal, start reading Washington Post articles. And the reason is very simple, right? Because if you realize both these are US-based companies. Now, the articles which are also coming are US-based articles. They will cover all the zones. Also, I don't know how many of you are aware, so we in India follow British English. However, SAT tests you on American English, right? And there are differences in terms of the rules that we follow in India versus in British English versus American English, right? Just for an example, in India, we would say it's A, comma, B, and C, right? So that's correct. However, this is wrong in American English. They would be writing it as A, comma, B, comma, and C. So there has to be a comma before and as well if you're looking at American English. But in British English, there is no comma before and, right? So that's one of the difference between the 2 grammar rules, right? So it's important. And hence I'm saying that start reading A, because that will make your comprehension speed better, your skills better. Plus, when you're reading these articles which are from outside of India, you will start noticing the differences in terms of these grammar rules as well, because writing section is testing you on grammar section and nothing else, right? They're testing your grammar skills. They're not asking you to write anything. There are questions given there. There is some error in the question. You have to rectify the error. That is what is being tested in the writing section, right? So that's about the SAT writing section per se. Now, when I said in this section, there are 4 major content domains. The first one is craft and structure and information and ideas. These 2 are largely focused on your reading capabilities. How well can you understand how well can you understand, how well can you comprehend the data given to you, the information given to you, the context given to you, right? How well are you able to locate, interpret, evaluate, and integrate information and ideas from the text, right? So all of this is part of your reading comprehension skills. The last 2, the standard English convention and expression of ideas, are nothing but which are largely related to your writing skills, which is pretty much focused on your grammar rule. So almost about 25% of it is your grammar rule. And the remaining 25% is again expression of ideas, which largely test your rhetorical skills, right? So I think that becomes super important as well. So if you really look at it, almost about 75% of your English is now dependent on your understanding of the passage in para which has been given to you, and only 25% to 26% depends on your grammar rules, right? So that's the way you really need to start focusing on when you're looking at the reading and writing section. Now, next is your math section. Again, just like English, they are also 2-stage adaptive test design. You will have your maths in both the stages, stage 1 and stage 2. There are a total of 22 questions, out of which 20 are operational questions and 2 are experimental questions, just like your English section as well. So 20 questions are being accounted towards your score, 2 will not be accounted towards your score. However, you would not know which are those 2 questions, hence you will end up doing all your 22 questions with the same focus, right? The time that you have is 35 minutes here. That means you have a roughly about 1.59 minutes per question. And again, please do keep note of this time, because when I'm talking about ACT, I will come back and give the reference of this timeline, right? So for the ACT math section, you have roughly about 1.59 minutes per question, which is super important. Now let's see what are they testing you on, right? So they're largely focusing on 4 major content domains. First one is algebra, which is roughly about 13 to 15 questions. Linear equation, inequalities, system of equation is what they test you on. Next one is problem solving and data analysis. Again, about 13 to 15 questions, which is testing you on ratio rate, proportion, unit rate, and so on and so forth. The third one is advanced math. That's roughly about 5 to 7 questions, which is testing all your non-linear equations, which is quadratic equation, exponential equation. The fourth one is geometry and trigonometry, which is roughly about, again, 5 to 7 questions out of 44 questions. Keep this in mind as well, because when I'm referring to ACT, this become an important factor. For geometry and trigonometry, you will have only about 5 to 7 questions, right? Which is largely testing your line, angle, triangle, area, volume, and so on and so forth. Now, so that's about the ACT in terms of everything about the exam, about all the sections that you will encounter. Now, the next exam that I'm going to take is ACT, which is American College Testing. But while I'm taking this test, I want us to achieve one thing post this webinar, right? I want you guys, if I'm able to help you take this call, whether your child should be taking an SAT or an ACT, because remember, you don't have to write both. You have to write one. It could be SAT or ACT. It's not SAT and ACT, right? So I want you to take this call for the child, whether they should be doing an SAT or should they be doing an ACT, right? So I'm gonna now do a compare and contrast between the two exams, and I will try and help you take this call between the two exams, right? Just like SAT, let's talk about similarities first. Just like SAT, ACT is an online exam. However, you cannot carry your own devices. You will have to do it on their machines. Third, ACT also happens 7 times a year, just like SAT. So in terms of frequency, it's the same. The results are out in about 2 to 3 days, just like SAT. So I think all these are commonalities that you will have. And again, it's conducted by an organization called act.org, which is a US-based organization. So I think up until this point, everything is very similar. Now let's talk about the contrasting part, right? Now in terms of duration, ACT is 2 hours, 55-minute test as opposed to 2 hours, 14-minute test, which is SAT. That's one difference. So ACT is longer exam. Second, ACT also has an optional essay component where you'll have to write an essay, which is a 40-minute additional apart from 2 hours, 55-minute, which was not part of the SAT. So that's another change. There are a total of 5 sections as opposed to only 2 sections in SAT. So that's another change. With regards to everything else, it's the same. They're largely testing your English and math skills, right? Now let's try and look at what are these sections individually, right? So there are, as I said, there are a total of 5 sections with an option section, which is the essay component. The first section that you will encounter in your ACT is English section, which is very similar to the grammar section, right? So there are a total of 75 questions in your 45 minutes. The minimum that you can score is 1. The maximum that you can score is 36. So ACT in terms of scoring is different. Unlike SAT, which is on a scale of 400 to 1600, ACT is on a scale of 1 to 36. The maximum that you can get is 36. The minimum that you can get is 1. If I have to talk about the concordance table between the SAT and ACT, I would say 1520 or 1530 is similar to about 35 or 34 in ACT, right? Because both of them are equivalent to 99th percentile. If you're able to score above 1510, 1520 in your SAT, you are above 99th percentile. So you are in the top 1 percentile bracket. Similarly, in ACT, if you're able to get 34 out of 36, you are in the top 1 percentile bracket. The second section that you have in ACT is maths, wherein you have 60 minutes, 60 questions. The third section is reading, which is very similar to the reading section of SAT, where you're reading the passage and answering the question. 40 questions, 35 minutes. The fourth section is science section. I know this might look very deceptive at this point of time. Why is there science here? But I'll come to this. Please hold your questions until that point. There are 40 questions and 35 minutes. And then you have an optional essay component, which is about 40 minutes, but you only have one essay prompt that you need to really answer in the essay. Let's look at each of these individual sections. So ACT English, as I said, is largely testing your grammar skills. So you will have the questions, they will do some errors. You have to rectify those errors, right? And again, it's an MCQ based test, right? So there are multiple options provided. You have to select out of the 5 options provided to you. There are roughly about 75 questions. You have 45 minutes to solve these questions. That means you have about 36 seconds per question. I don't know how many of you remember in SAT in English, we had 1.19 minutes per question. Here we only have 36 seconds per question, which is crazy because we only have about 1/3 time. And that's going to be the major differentiating factor between the two exams. ACT is very, very time intensive exam. You have to be really, really quick. There are more number of questions that you will encounter in ACT. However, the difficulty level of questions in ACT is much simpler than SAT. Now, that's a call that one has to take. Are you somebody who's okay with time pressure, but needs easier question, or you are somebody who needs more time, but you're okay with slightly complex questions, right? Based on that, you can select whether it's SAT or ACT is right choice for you. Now, what are they testing you on? As I said, same thing, just like SAT, not much change with regards to the content for the English section. The next section that you have is math, where you have 60 minutes, 60 questions. Again, 1 minute per question. If you remember in SAT, we had 1.59 minutes per question. So that's roughly about 60% less time that you have in ACT. So you have to be really, really quick. What are they testing you on? Algebra, very similar to the SAT. Then you have geometry and trigonometry. But I think one important thing to note here, look at the number of questions we have in geometry and trigonometry. Here, 14, 9, and 4. That's roughly about 40-45%. Right? So roughly about 40-45% of your math is from geometry and trigonometry. Now, that's an important point to note. If you are somebody who is not very good with trigonometry and geometry, then you may want to stick to SAT because you only had about 12-15% of it in SAT. But if you're somebody who's not very comfortable with algebra, then you may want to stick to ACT because SAT is very, very algebra heavy in terms of math. So that's a very important question that you would like to note here. SAT is very strong algebra heavy. ACT, on the other hand, is equally distributed between algebra and trigonometry. That's another pointer that you should keep in mind before you decide whether you want to write an SAT or an ACT. The third section that you have in ACT is reading section, wherein you have 40 questions, 35 minutes. You have roughly about 52 seconds per question. So it's very similar to what you had in SAT, not much of a change. There you had about 1 minute, 19 seconds. Here you have about 52 seconds. Obviously, you still have to be quicker. And also, please do note, here, there are no changes which has happened. So you still have to read the entire passage and answer 10 questions. So you'll have total of 4 passages. Each passage will have 10 questions. You still have to read the entire passage and answer the question. That's what is happening in the ACT reading section. What are they testing you on? Again, the same thing, your rhetorical skills, your information and ideas, exactly same as what they're testing you on SAT. And similarly here as well, you have to be good at reading because they're picking up topics from different zones. There's prose fiction, there's social science, there's humanities, there's natural science. Hence, it's important to make sure you start reading. If you don't read, trust me, you will improve in reading, but only to a certain extent, and you will find it difficult to break that ceiling after a particular score. I can give you that in writing, right? I mean, I've seen enough students who are generally putting a lot of effort, but because now they don't have enough time to develop that brain in terms of their comprehension skills, they get and hit that ceiling in the reading section per se. Now, the next one is the ACT science section. So there are a total of 40 questions. You have roughly about 35 minutes that you have to do. Now, this is an important section for me, right? So now a lot of parents and students come to me and say, hey, Rajdeep, you know what? We wish to apply for a STEM course. So maybe we should be doing ACT because there's the ACT science here. Or there are other category of parents who will come back and say, hey, you know what? We don't want to apply to STEM courses. We're probably looking at economics major or something. So maybe we should not do the ACT, right? Now, that's an important question for us to note because remember, there is no science per se in ACT science as well. You are just reading the science-based passages and answering the question. So it is still a reading comprehension test. You're reading the science-based passages and answering the question. That's the only difference. However, if you're a science student, would you have an advantage? Definitely, yes. Would you be at a disadvantage if you have not done science? Yes. But you still have enough time to read the passage and answer the question just like an answer passage. So I genuinely don't think there is any disadvantage to anybody in this section. Consider it like a reading comprehension section and then do it. So there is no science. You don't really have to be worried about the ACT science section being a science section. It's predominantly a reading section. I hope that answers the question here. What are the testing on? They're largely categorized into 3 broader categories, all the passages. One is data representation, where let's say they've done an experiment, they'll present the data. Now you read this data and answer the question. That is data representation for you. The second set of passages are research summary passage, where somebody has done a research, they have their entire hypothesis, they also have an experimentation results and everything given in the passage form. Now you have to read all of it and answer the question. So it's a lot more textual as opposed to data representation. The third category is conflicting viewpoint passages, where let's say there are two different people or scientists who have conflicting viewpoints about a particular topic. Let's say if it is about black hole, they might have two different viewpoints on it. Now that is presented to you in the form of data and information, and you have to read this information, answer the question. And obviously conflicting viewpoint is a lot more textual than research summary as well, right? So it takes a lot longer to solve the conflicting viewpoint passages. So these are broadly three categories of ACT science passages that we will encounter. Now, so these are differences that we have seen, right? So we have looked at both the section test. We have seen what are the major differentiating factor. The major differentiating factor, one was speed. You have to be really, really quick in terms of the ACT as opposed to SAT. Second, there's an ACT science section in the ACT, which is not part of the SAT. Third, in the math section, you have higher algebra percentage as opposed to an SAT, where you have, in SAT, you have a higher algebra percentage as opposed to ACT, where it's equally distributed between algebra and geometry. That's another factor that you really need to look at. ACT has a slightly easier vocabulary and easier questions as opposed to SAT, right? So these are major differences between the two. However, I don't know if that's good enough for you to take a call. Some of the students might be able to take a call between these two exams based on this. However, if you're still confused and not able to take that call, we have a solution for it. So there is this link that we have. It's called examprep.rewiser.in/register. If you go to this website, you can register yourself for free on this website. You will get 2 free diagnostic tests, one for SAT, one for ACT. Please write both these exams online on your own. You don't need any help from anybody. After you're done with the test, 2 things will happen. A, you will get your scores, which are detailed report scores in terms of where you have done well, where you have not done well, and everything would be there. Second, what will also happen is you yourself would have seen the 2 types of questions. So you would know where are you more comfortable with. And based on that, you should take a call between SAT and ACT. Please don't go by just by hearsay saying, hey, you know what, because I only have support for SAT, let me do SAT, or because my friends have done ACT, so let me do ACT, right? So figure out which is the right test for you and then do that exam. Some of you might have this question, can I do both? Yes, you can do both. There is no harm in doing that. However, you need time, right? And the problem here is that you have very limited time. There's a lot of things to be done and you have limited time for it. So it's better if you can figure out which is the right test for you before you deep dive into this test. Since you all have registered for the event, we will send out a mailer to you, which will have a link for this diagnostic test. Feel free to go ahead and write the test. And after the test, if you want to understand the report, feel free to set up a one-on-one consultation session with my team, and they'll be happy to walk you through the report post this. Now that's about SAT, ACT. Now, I'm sure some of you would have heard about PSAT, which is called preliminary SAT, right? It's a shortened version of the SAT. In terms of content, in terms of syllabus, very similar to the SAT, just a slightly easier version of the SAT. Do you really have to take SAT? Not mandatorily. Who takes the PSAT, right? PSAT happens in grade 9, grade 10, grade 11. Now, there are various reasons why people write PSAT, right? One of the major reasons why some people write PSAT is because their school mandates it. Simple, right? There are a lot of international schools across India where school automatically by default register every student for this exam. So you still have to write it. Second, some people write it because you want to figure out where do child stand at this point of time globally in the PSAT prep, right? So that is the second reason. Third, some students also write it because you're also looking at summer school program. If you want to apply for summer school, you want to understand where you are at this point of time, right? So there are some students who are applying for summer school right after grade 10th in the summer. And those summer schools also look at your PSAT score if you have done it. And if you've done fairly well in it, I think you might be able to fetch some scholarship for these summer school programs as well, which helps in your profile building overall, right? So these are the various reasons why people write PSAT. One of the other reasons why some people write PSAT, I don't know if there are any parents and families where the child is a US citizen or an OCI card holder. If that's the case, then they should write the PSAT in grade 11, because PSAT in grade 11 for a US citizen is also known as NMSQT, which is National Merit Scholarship Qualifying Test. So it's super important for you to make sure that we are able, I mean, if in case you're in grade 11 and you're a US citizen, you write this exam because you might have a potential to earn some scholarship out of it, right? But yeah, as I said, in terms of content, it's very, very similar. Now let's try and look at the standardized testing timelines, right? So as I said, there are largely 4 years, which is grade 9, 10th, 11th, and 12th. That's what we have across the 4 years. Now there are multiple components to it, right? So as I said, your academic scores are super, super important. So your grade 9, 10th, 11th actual, your 12th predicted exam scores will go back to the college. Then comes the profile development. Anything and everything that you would do in the last 4 years between 9 to 12 becomes super important, because when you're applying to college, they will ask you for your latest activity, right? So anything that you've done in the last 4 to 5 years is super important, as opposed to you've done something in second grade, third grade, fifth grade, might not hold so much of value, right? So all of that is profile development. So that is something that you will continue to do across the process. Then we talked about another pillar, which was your college application, which you can see here, which happens in grade 12. So grade 12th is the time where you will do your shortlisting of universities, because by the time you will have all your scores ready. Based on that, your counselor will be able to help you out to figure out what are the right university you should be applying to. And accordingly, you should be applying to the universities. And then they will also help you with letter of recommendation, essays, all of that will come in grade 12, right? Now, apart from that, the fourth pillar that we also talked about was standardized test, which we discussed. We discussed about SETs, we discussed about ACTs, we discussed about PSAT. Obviously, we didn't have enough time to talk about APs. AP stands for Advanced Placement Courses. These are college level courses that we do, and they are super, super important for the students who are coming from our nationalized syllabus. For example, CBSE, ICSE, and state board curriculum, because your curriculum may not look very rigorous to the US board. To compensate for it, you should be doing AP exams, because AP exams are quite credible in US, and they are considered to be as equivalent to a college level course. And hence they are also happy to give you credits if you have done an AP course. For example, if you have done an advanced placement course in calculus and you score full, which is 5 on 5 in AP calculus, you earn 8 college credits, which is super important, because in US, you have to pay for each and every college credit that you're applying for, right? So that's why AP exams become super important for the students who are coming from Indian nationals. It's also important for students which are coming from AS, A-level and IB international curriculum for various reasons, because, for example, if you've not done well in a particular subjects, but you still feel you're good at it, you can always compensate it by doing an AP. Or because of your subject selection, you couldn't take a particular subject, but you still want to showcase to the college that you're good at it, you can actually do an AP course for it, right? So AP in itself is a very, very broad topic. We will conduct a separate webinar for the APs. We didn't want to, I know there's a lot of information that we have shared today. We didn't want to mix it up with APs as well. However, if you are in rush to kind of understand about APs, feel free to visit our YouTube channel. You'll be able to find some of our recordings from the previous AP webinars, and you'll be able to get enough information from them. Otherwise, feel free to reach out to our team. They'll share their numbers on the chat section. They'll be happy to help you out with the APs as well. But coming back to the timelines, PSAT, as I said, you could write in grade 9, grade 10, grade 11, only if you're a US citizen, right? For your SET prep, depending on what curriculum you're coming from. If you're coming from an international curriculum, I would say you could start your prep in grade 10th itself, and try and see if you can write your first attempt of SET in grade 10th and finish it off, maybe around March timeframe. And if you're already in grade 11, then you need to start as soon as possible. For a CBSE and ICSE student, if you're done with your 10th board exams now, you're in your summer break, this is the perfect time for you to start your SET prep or ACT prep, and try and see if you can write your first attempt probably in October this year or November this year. And then your next attempt could be either December or March or May, depending on your scores and your other timelines, right? So that would be your timelines for the SETs and ACTs. Same goes for ACT as well. With regards to the APs, you can write it as early as grade 9. There are students this year we've handled who have done APs in grade 9. So you can do APs in grade 9, you can do it in grade 10, grade 11, grade 12. Remember, AP happens only once a year, which is in the month of May. And hence it becomes super important for you to plan them really, really well. And because they are happening only once a year, the registration deadline is around November before that year. So it is important for you to plan them really well. and also to pick the right subject choices, right? Which is the right subject, because in grade 9, you can't do a calculus because you will fail miserably there in that case, right? So you have to pick up a right subject choice, a slightly easier subject choice, maybe in 9th and 10th. Maybe in 11th and 12th, you can start picking up the slightly difficult subjects, right? So those are the testing timelines broadly. However, that's a broader timelines. We need to sit with every individual families and students one-on-one to help you understand. Feel free to set up a free consultation session with the team. We'll drop our numbers here on the chat section. Feel free to call us, set up a free one-on-one consultation session where we can help you understand for your child what are the right timelines, right? So if you're in 9th, what you should do next in 10th, in 11th, in 12th, we should be able to help you out with that. Next is, as I said in the very beginning, there are multiple places apart from US where SAT scores are applicable. India is one of those countries now. There are almost about 40 plus universities as we speak where SAT scores are acceptable. This is the link where you can go and check for yourselves, international.collegeboard.org, SAT acceptance India. But just to name few, Ashoka University, Azim Premji, Flame, Kriya, Manavratna, Shivnadar, Plaksha. So all the top liberal universities in India which are coming up have started accepting SAT scores, right? So they actually help you replace their internal exam, right? So instead of writing the SAT score, instead of writing their individual test, you could actually write the SAT and apply to these colleges. So that's the advantage of submitting the having the SAT scores as well. Now with that, we've covered all the topics that we wanted to cover. I'll just want to quickly take you through if in case you decide to work with us for your SAT ST prep. As I said in the very beginning, we do the entire test prep where we help students with SATs, ACTs, finding out which is the right fit for them, and then help them prepare for the exam. We also help them with the AP exams. We do about 13 subjects there. We also help you with the IELTS prep and then academic tutoring also, right? Now, let me quickly explain how our SAT program works. We divide the component into 4 phases. We call it phase 0, 1, 2, and 3. Phase 0 is about doing a diagnostic test. That's largely to figure out which is the right test for the child. What is your starting point? And also to figure out if there's a particular program that you should be looking for instead of a full program. So that's in phase 0. Then you move to phase 1, where there are roughly about 40 hours of classes, which includes your reading, writing, maths, all the components put together. And after every session, so every session is a 2-hour long class. And after every 2-hour session, there are 2 hours of assignment that the child has to do. So we believe in 1:1 ratio of, there is some bit of rote learning which is happening here. You're learning a concept and you're applying those concepts in actual questions, right? So roughly about 80 hours of time commitment. This happens over a period of 2 months. Along with this, you'll also have, so these sessions will happen live online with the faculty live. And alongside that, you will also have access to our recorded concept videos, which you can always go back and access at any point of time. So this can happen in group. You can opt for one-on-one, whatever program you would like to opt for. Once this is done, you move to phase 2. From here on, program becomes a customized one-on-one program from every individual. We will provide 1 test each for reading for the English and the math component. The student will write the exam. Basis that, we will assign a dedicated mentor. There's 1 dedicated mentor assigned to every student. This mentor will analyze the score performance from phase 1 assignments and figure out the areas where the child has done well and the areas where they still need to work upon. This mentor will continue to meet with the student once in every week, analyze the scores from the sectional test that the child would be doing every week, and figure out what areas the child needs to do and what are the steps that they need to take at that point of time. So that will continue to happen in phase 2. Once this gets over, we move to phase 3, which is largely about the mock test, where student would be doing at least about 10 to 15 full length tests before they write their final exam. We recommend that the student should write 2 tests per week. These are proctor's tests. We ask all our students to join a particular link at a particular time so that they get that exam feeling. And then the exam starts. There's somebody who's proctoring on the other end. The moment they're done with the exam, they get a detailed report saying what areas they're doing well, what areas they need to improve, and so on and so forth. So that happens in the phase 3, where they're doing the full and mock test, and that will continue until they write their final exam. So that's how the overall program works. We do provide them support for the second attempt. If in case somebody don't get the score that they are really looking for in the first attempt, they could always opt for the second attempt as well. Right? So that's part of the program. Somebody can opt for the full program. There are some students who can also opt for English only program or maths only program or they can just come and do the tests with us, right? So we do provide all the different options for the students to look out for. They don't really have to just look out for full program. They can pick and choose the different programs. That's all about the program. And that's all about the presentation and the webinar topic that I wanted to cover. Now I'll be happy to take up the questions if there are any in the chat section. Feel free to put it up in the chat section and I'll try and take up all the questions there. Great, I can see few questions here. Let me try and answer these questions. So I think I can see a question from Akhil, Aryan's dad. Please explain again, US citizen must write PSAT in 11th grade. Yes. So Akhil, if the child is in grade 11, right? And if the child is US citizen, then you should write PSAT, because PSAT is also known as NMSQT, which is National Merit Scholarship Qualifying Test, right? So it becomes important because if the child ends up doing well in the PSAT NMSQT in grade 11, you have a possibility to A, get some scholarship, and B, also to mention it in your application process, saying the child is a NMSQT round 1 qualifier, right? So that's the way it kind of helps. I hope I've answered that question.
Yeah, one more question. So should the child still then try to write it once in 10th and then reappear in 11th?
I mean, that's completely up to you, because the PSAT scores are not going to college. So don't worry about writing PSAT multiple times. Okay. No college will ask you for your PSAT scores ever. If you just want to give him a practice, he can write it in grade 10th as well. Otherwise, he can directly write it in grade 11th also. Perfect. Next, I have another question from Mr. Vikas. Hi, what are the charges for the preparation of these tests, and can child cope up with these regular academic sessions in schools? Mr. Vikas, as I said, there are multiple programs that we have. We will send out the brochures to you. You have already registered for our event. Ritvik has also shared his number in the chat section. You can feel free to call him up. There are multiple programs, there are different fees structure for it. Can the child cope up with their regular academic session? Definitely yes, sir, because that's how everyone else is managing, right? All the other students are also managing along with the school sessions. So they can definitely manage it for sure. But it's just that you just have to plan it well and ahead of time. Try and see if you can do it, majority of it during the summer break, because that way the school grades are not getting affected, right? Because as I've already told, right, it's very, very important to make sure you're super focused towards your school grades, right? Because they are really, really important. Another question from Vikas: how difficult it would be for students who are aiming for JEE main school academics? It is going to be difficult, Vikas, in that case, right? Because then the child is in multiple boats. The child is looking at JEE, the child is looking at school academic grades, the child is also looking at this. It is going to be difficult, because if you're looking at trying to be, your hands in multiple places, it is going to be challenging. But at the same point of time, if you really look at it, somebody preparing for JEE, the math might become really, really simple for them, right? Because the SAT math is a very, very base level math. I mean, it's only up until grade 10th level math. So that way, I think math will become easier for this child, but they might struggle with English. So they might need really good support with the English part, is what we have generally seen with the students who are preparing for JEE and also trying to do this, right? But personally, if you ask me, I would advise, I know as a parent might be difficult, but I would advise, have a clear-cut direction, right? Either let him just focus on JEE then, right? Say, okay, here is the path, you will do your undergrad in India, focus on this. Or let him just focus on the study abroad, because both are very, very different journey and both requires good amount of effort, right? So, and no child can really do both together. I mean, there are few kids which are exceptional students who can do it, but very few such students, right? So my personal advice is always to have a clear direction, whichever direction, and I'm not saying which is the right direction, that would depend on various factors. Pick one and then maybe let the child work in that direction is what I would advise. Another question from Arman. What colleges abroad can I get into with SAT/ST scores? Arman, all the colleges in US are open for you if you have done the ST/ST. As I said, Canada, Singapore, Hong Kong. So ST/ST is just one requirement, right? If you remember, if you have attended the entire webinar, in the beginning, I said there are multiple other factors that you really need to look at if you're looking at the ST, if you're looking at study abroad, right? So ST with ST outside of India, as I said, a lot of colleges option. Everything in US is open for you. Canada, Singapore, Hong Kong is also open. Another question from KD, is JEE a superset of SAT or the other way around? Okay, good question. I would not say either. All right, JEE is a very, very different exam than SAT. JEE tests your physics, chemistry, maths, and that too till grade 12th level. SAT tests your math and English, and math is also only till grade 10th. You know, I would say it's a very, JEE is a superset of SAT if you want to put it that way, with some exclusions in the SAT. So there is a very small overlap, and that overlap is very, very minimalistic, right? So I would not say that there is any overlap between the two. If I have to put it in a very, very broader category, KD. Okay, Vikas has a point here. Actually, we have to have a plan B if things don't go well. I agree with you, Vikas. I agree with you on that perspective, but I'm just saying that in that case, one of the two things will take a hit, right? Because the child will not be able to focus on the JEE as well and do profile building and do SATs and do academically well, So I think it requires then a very, very different sort of time commitment per se, right? So at some point, in one of the plans, you will end up compromising for it, right? Because if you don't have a strong profile and everything, then you may not be able to look at the top 20, top 30 colleges in US, right? So I think it all depends on that, right? I'm with you on that, right? That we have to have a plan B, right? But I'm just saying that then in that case, and there are enough parents and students who do that with us today as well, right? This year we did about 700, 800 students, and all of them, some of them had that option where they wanted to keep a plan B, right? But I'm saying at one place you might end up compromising on the level. So you'll have to decide where would that be, right? So that's the way I'm looking at it. Another question from Arshia Gupta. And Mr. Vikas, I'm happy to have a separate call with you one-on-one. I'm pretty sure this is a lot more complex process, and there's no right and wrong in this process. Another question from Arshia Gupta. Hi, in continuation to Mr. Vikas' question, how to decide what to choose, JEE or study abroad for BTech engineering is similar thing? Oh, okay. That's a very broad question, Arshia. So I think that all depends on multiple factors, I said in the beginning. Right? Cost is one of the biggest factor for me, right? It's study abroad outside of India, let's say US, you're looking at an investment of at least about 1.5 CR for the 4 years, versus in India would at max be about 40, 50 lakh, 60 lakh. So you're talking about 3 times of your expense going up, right? So I think cost is going to be a major factor when you're looking to go abroad versus staying in India. Second, I think how mature the child is, right? Remember, you're sending a 17-year-old kid away from you in a new country on their own. They have been a sheltered kid, right? So I think, do you think the child is ready mentally right now to be in a new place, new country on their own? Do you have family support there, right? So, how comfortable are you with that country? Do you see the job prospects there in that country? So I think broadly, first you should decide between study abroad and outside and study in India. And once you've decided if it is study abroad, then decide the country, right? Because that's how you need to deep dive into it, right? However, my way to look at it is if a child can get into top universities in India, and especially when you're talking about engineering, because we have great universities in engineering. So I did my undergrad from BITS Pilani. So I'm an Indian curriculum, product. So I did my engineering from BITS Pilani. I went through your entire JEE route and BITSAT and all of that, right? So if you can get into top universities in India, which is maybe about 10,000 seats across India, right? Great. But if you can't, then the problem is we don't have good tier 2 universities in India, right? So the gap between tier 1 and tier 2 is huge. However, if you look at US, even if you can't get into top 10 or top 15, and if you can get into top 50, the gap is very, right? So the second tier of universities in US or any other country would be far better than any tier 2 universities in India, right? That's the trade-off that you're looking at, right? That's the way you need to figure it out, right? If the child has a potential to crack, let's say, those top seats, then they should do undergrad here in India for sure, right? And then figure out if they want to do masters outside of India. However, if they can't, then they should probably, and if you can afford, if these two factors collate together, then I would say tier 2 colleges in US or Canada or Singapore would be better than trying to stick to tier 2 in India. That's one way to look at it. Another question from Akhil, do they still have SAT subject tests? Should we write those? Akhil, there are no SAT subject tests offered now. So you don't have those, and hence APs are very, very important now, right? Because APs are the only way for you to showcase your subject matter expertise. Earlier, there used to be subject SAT for maths, physics, chemistry, bio, but now they're no longer there, right? So you don't have that option. You should be looking at APs. Happy to sit with you, help you understand about the APs, and maybe I think that we just note the name. You can reach out to Akhil sir and have a call with him and probably share the AP recording with him as well for him to understand about it.
Okay. And
another question, sorry.
Yeah, kind of related question. For a student studying in IB curriculum, not CBSE, are AP exams still required, or is it only for CBSE?
Good question, Akhil. As I mentioned, right, it's not about required, but I would say there are various reasons why one end up writing APs even when they are in international curriculum, right? One of the reason is you may want to write an AP which is in humanities course. For example, you may want to write it in psychology, microeconomics, or world history. US loves to see humanities courses for some reason, right? They have a craze about it. So if you have not done it in your IB, if you're not planning to do it in IB, you could take that as an external AP course. That's one. Second, for some reason, if you end up not doing well in, let's say, any particular subject in IB or IB, to compensate for it and to show that you are still good at this subject, you do an AP, right? So that's one of the reasons why some people write AP in that course, right? So there are different reasons why people end up writing AP courses, right? Even when they are in international curriculum.
Okay.
But yes, in terms of credit, they don't write it because you will get a credit if the child is in IB already, right? If your child is already in IB, you will get college credits for the courses that he would have done in school also.
Thank you.
Welcome. Another question from KD, how do we figure which is better for the child? The child is in 9th, is unable to make a call since it is a little earlier in their education or abroad. Okay, I think I've taken that question. I've answered this question, KD, when I was answering Arshiya's question. What are the factors that you should be looking at? I understand it will be difficult for the child to figure it out. I think it's, as a parent, you'll have to kind of take that call for the child and keep the child with you in that journey, right? So I think for the child, you'll have to figure out what is that major, and whether it's India abroad, that's the call that you will have to take for the child, and then take the child along with you in that journey. Another question from Arshia, how about taking a gap year if plan does not work out? There are students who do that as well, Arshia. You're absolutely right. There are students who do that as well. There's no harm in doing that. You just have to figure out that you use that gap year really, really well. You cannot take a gap year just to do an SAT. You have to show a lot more than that, because remember, if the college will see that, okay, you took a gap year, you only did SAT, and there are other students who did it while they were doing the school as well. So, these kids are capable of doing a lot more rigorous curriculum on their own, right? So that's a negative point. So if you're doing a gap year, make sure you use it really, really well. Internships, research paper, all of that has to be done during the gap year. On the question from KD, what are the school grades required for top universities abroad, especially since you mentioned that the academics is the most important? What are the school grades required? Top grades, KD, whatever maximum you can get is super important. Especially when you're talking about top universities abroad, they are, highly, highly, highly competitive, right? Whatever maximum you can, it will always help your case. Another question from Arshia, cost can be calculated in terms of placement prospects also. Definitely. Exactly. That's what I said. One of the factors that I said was also the country where you are going to place the child, because, and when I talk about country, I'm looking at the country's economy, how they are, how it is growing, what sort of job opportunities are available there for the branch that you're looking at. Do you have a family support and all of that in that, right? So I think all those would really, really help as well. Also, after studying at a year at a tier 2 college in India, can we apply in the second year to study abroad, or the child has to start it all over again? In most of the cases, you'll have to start it all over again, Asha. The credit transfer doesn't really work that well from India to outside of study abroad. And also, even if you end up applying, it may not be to a good university. So again, you may want to rethink about that option. Thanks for sharing your number, Vikas. I'll ask Ritvik to keep a note of this number and maybe give you a call back. Okay, another question from Arshia. How about taking gap year if planned? Please answer that again if possible. Oh, okay. Can I connect with you separately? Definitely, Arshia, you can connect with us separately. I think Ritvik has already dropped his number. You can have a call with him. I'm happy to have a call. Whatever. So I'm dropping his number again to you as well. But to answer that question again about a gap year, you can take a gap year for sure. There's no harm in doing that. But my point is, don't just take a gap year for doing SAT. Make it a lot more than that. Make it, because you'll have to explain it in your application, right? So you have to showcase that, oh, hey, you know what? The child was not very clear about the stream. So the child did 4-month internship with one firm, 2-month internship with another firm to figure out what is the right fit for them. So do more than just doing an SAT prep, right? I mean, that should not be the case for taking a gap year. If you're taking a gap year, you have to use that gap year really, really well, right? So I think that is super important, how you utilize that gap year. You also give coaching for AP subjects. Definitely, Katie. Just to repeat, we have 2 verticals within the company. The first one is test prep. Under test prep, we help students with SAT prep, ACT prep, AP prep. AP we help for 13 subjects: calculus, AB, BC, physics 1, physics 2, physics C, mechanics, physics C, electricity, magnetism, chem, bio, microeconomics, macroeconomics, world history, psychology, computer science application. So about 13 subjects is what we cater to at this point of time for AP. And we also help with IELTS prep. On the other side, we also have academic tutoring vertical where we help students with IGCSE, IB, and A level, pure subject tutoring. If you're struggling with maths, physics, chemistry, bio, English, accounts, business, eco. So these are the subjects that we also cater to. Yes. Okay, these are the questions that I have. We also help with profile building like scholarships and internship. Katie, we don't help in that aspect. We only take care of the academics and test prep vertical. But we have different organizations who we work with who will be happy to support you in that. So we'll be happy to share their numbers and contacts with you. You can always reach out to them and they are the experts there. We believe in our strength, which is our academics and test prep. We stick to this only. Great. I think these are the questions that I had. While others are thinking, I would like to thanks all of you for joining us on a Saturday morning. I hope the session was useful. I hope there was some useful information that you guys have taken up from the session. If there's anything else, I'm dropping my number in the chat section here right away. If there's anything else, feel free to reach out to me. If in case I'm not able to get in touch with you on call, please feel free to drop me a message on WhatsApp. I will definitely try and respond back as quickly as possible. So we got a number from Katie already. And we also got number from Vikas. Right, so we have these 2 numbers. Anyone else, this is my number as I've shared on the chat section. Feel free to reach out to us. Happy to help you out in whatever way possible. We got Akhil's number as well. Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Neelu, for appreciating the session. As I said, I think we would do the AP session very soon enough. We will keep you guys posted as well. However, if you don't want to wait until then, you have some time, feel free to reach out to our YouTube channel and you will find the AP webinar there. Otherwise, you can reach out to any one of us. We'll be happy to share the link for the AP webinar with you. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining in. Have a lovely weekend. Thanks for coming in. Bye-bye. Take care.